The Man in the Attic That Only My Son Can See. The Man in the Attic. Welcome, dear listeners, to a tale so disturbing that, by hearing it, you've already invited something into your life. A presence that will follow you, lurking in the shadows. Don't think for a second that you're safe, for the curse of this story doesn't end when the words do. You may feel its cold breath on the back of your neck, or hear it whispering your name in the quiet moments after you close your eyes. But don't stop now. You're too far in. This is the story of the man in the attic that only my son can see. The house was old. Older than I had ever realized when we moved in. The wooden floors creaked beneath our every step, and the walls seemed to groan as though they were trying to speak, but only to the youngest member of our family. My son, Evan, who was only 5 years old at the time, always seemed to be staring into the darkness of the attic door. A door I had never paid much attention to, until he started mentioning the man. At first, I brushed it off as an overactive imagination, a common trait in children. He had a way of creating stories, sometimes about his invisible friends, sometimes about monsters hiding under the bed. But it was the man in the attic that made my skin crawl. Evan spoke of him as if he had known him for years, describing the man in the attic in eerie, vivid detail. "He's just standing there, Daddy," Evan would say, his tiny voice quivering as he clung to my side. "He watches me when I go to sleep." At night, I would find him sitting upright in his bed, staring at the attic door, his eyes wide and unblinking. "He's watching me," Evan would whisper, his voice thick with dread. "I can feel his eyes on me." I tried everything to reassure him. I would check under the bed, open the closet doors, and tell him that there was nothing to be afraid of. But no matter what I did, the fear lingered in his eyes. Then came the night when things changed. I was alone in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a faint scratching sound coming from above, the attic. A sound I hadn't noticed before. At first, it was light, almost like something scraping against wood. Then it grew louder, sharp and deliberate, as if something was trying to claw its way down. I froze. My heart beat in my throat, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. It was a sound that didn't belong. The attic had been sealed for years. There was nothing up there. Nothing. But still, the scratching continued. I turned toward the staircase leading to the attic and froze once more when I saw Evan standing at the base of the stairs, staring up at the attic door. His face was pale, his expression blank, but there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't place. "He's up there," Evan said, his voice barely a whisper. And with that, I could feel it, the oppressive weight of something wrong. Something that should never have been disturbed. I couldn't tell you exactly what happened next. I felt myself walking toward the stairs, my body moving against my will. It was as if an unseen force was guiding me, compelling me to climb toward the attic. My breath quickened as I ascended, each step heavier than the last, until I reached the door. The scratching had stopped, and in the silence, the air felt thick, suffocating. With trembling hands, I reached for the door handle and paused, glancing back at Evan, who was still standing in the hallway, his eyes wide. His lips barely moved when he said, "He's waiting for you." I opened the door. And that's when I saw him. Remember, the moment you finish this story, you'll feel it. You'll know he knows you heard it. And maybe, you won't be alone anymore. Subscribe to the channel because this tale has only just begun, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The horrifying truth. You've made it this far and now there's no turning back. The moment you let the first part of this story settle into your mind, the door has been opened. The thing you've been hearing in the darkness, the thing that's been watching, has noticed you. Knows you. Now that you've listened, you will never be the same. As I stepped into the attic, the air was thick with the stench of decay. It hit me like a wall, suffocating, clinging to my skin. The darkness was absolute, but I felt it, the presence of something not quite human, not quite dead. My hand gripped the door frame, trying to steady myself as a cold shiver crawled up my spine. I tried to speak, to call out, but my voice failed me, strangled by the suffocating air around me. My eyes strained to pierce the blackness, but there was nothing. Nothing but the feeling of being watched. And then, there he was. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing perfectly still in the far corner. His silhouette barely visible, like a shadow twisted into a form. I wanted to scream, but my throat was locked tight. His eyes, those eyes, burned through the darkness, two pale orbs of unnatural light. They glowed, not with the softness of a human eye, but with something far more malevolent. A thing that had no business being alive, no right to exist in this world. I wanted to step back, to run, to flee, but my feet were frozen, cemented to the ground. His eyes were locked on mine, pulling me in, drawing me closer to him with an invisible force. Every breath felt like it would be my last. Suddenly, I heard Evan's voice, soft and desperate, echoing through the attic. "Daddy, don't look at him. He's not supposed to be seen." But it was too late. I had already looked. And now, the man in the attic was coming for me. He moved, but not like a normal man. His limbs twisted and contorted, unnatural and jerky. The way he moved was wrong, as though he were a puppet on strings, only the strings were broken, and he had learned to move of his own accord. And with each movement, the air grew colder, the shadows deeper. His mouth opened, and I could hear him breathing, not with lungs but with something far darker, far more ancient. "You shouldn't have come," the voice rasped, sounding more like a guttural growl than a whisper. "Now you'll never leave." The moment the words left his lips, the attic seemed to shift. The walls closed in. The ceiling descended. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The only thing I could hear, aside from my own frantic breaths, was the sound of his footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. I turned, desperate to escape, but the stairs had disappeared. The door had vanished. I was trapped. Trapped in this nightmarish space with the man who should have never existed. Evan's voice again, faint and distant, barely audible through the crushing terror that filled my mind. "He's watching you now, Daddy. You can't escape. He's in your mind." It hit me then, the horror, the real horror. The man in the attic didn't just haunt the house. He haunted you. He lived in your thoughts. In the corners of your mind, where shadows hide, where you're too afraid to look. And as he reached out to touch me, his hand, long, bony, and cold as death itself, brushed against my skin. A shock of cold fear shot through me, paralyzing my body. I knew then, there was no escaping him. Not from the attic. Not from the house. And certainly not from my own mind. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the man's face, inches from mine. His lips twisted into a grin, revealing teeth that looked like they belonged to something long dead. "I'm always here," he whispered as his eyes burned into mine. "Waiting. Watching. Waiting for you to come home. The house, my house, has been silent since that night. The doors are sealed. The windows locked tight. But I know it's not over. He is still here. He's always watching. Always waiting. And now so are you. You heard the story, didn't you? And now you're part of it. Just like me. You will hear him too. You'll feel him watching. You'll hear the scratching from above. You'll feel the cold breath on your neck in the dark. You thought you could escape the nightmare. But the moment you listened, the moment you let his name slip from your lips, you invited him in. He's waiting. And you're never alone. If you want to learn more, if you're brave enough to step deeper into this world of shadows and terror, make sure to subscribe. But be warned, you may never find peace again once you do. And remember, if you ever hear the scratching from above, you know who it is.